So my name is Stephen Goudreault. I'm the cloud security evangelist here at Gigamon. And Traci, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Traci Sever. I lead global cyber strategy and go-to-market at Worldwide Technology.
Traci, what's your background in cyber?
Yeah, so I've been in cyber for about 13 years. Started off at a tiny startup out in Southern California, and then worked my way up at companies like McAfee and Symantec. And then got antsy and went back to the startup community, which is always fun for a build. And then came over to WWT, and I worked primarily when I first started here with our global banks. And it was just such an incredible experience to see the transformation that those guys were going through and really documenting that. And that's kind of what led me to lead our strategy, is making sure that we're always using best practices, driving towards really great outcome, leveraging all of our experts and folks in the field who can really make a difference.
And what role does WWT play in the cybersecurity field?
It's kind of interesting. Our heritage is that we came heavily from a networking and infrastructure background. And I'm sure, as you guys can tell, we're like a huge Cisco partner, something we're super proud of and really kind of shaped our journey and where we came from. But as the years went on, we started really seeing this huge push into cyber, right? And for us, we have such amazing access and have worked on such transformational projects with our customers that we really started wrapping security in a very meaningful way into all of our engagements. So it's very heavy on the consulting side, where we really walk them through and understand, okay, what's your initiative? What's your mission? How can we sit at the table with you and help drive those outcomes? So we focus on a lot of different things. The trends that we see in the industry, there's a lot about business continuity and resilience and answering the call when it comes to regulations and compliance. And not just checking the box, but also really driving towards North Stars, like things like Zero Trust.
That's a real challenge with compliance, right? Checking the box for actually trying to solve the problem. So what's one of the unique strengths or differentiators that WWT brings to the table?
Yeah, like one of the coolest things that we have at WWT is something called the ATC. So it's the Advanced Technology Center. It's in St. Louis, which is where we're headquartered, and it's about $1 billion investment that our customers leverage. And you can do anything in there from the cyber front, running things like capture the flag events. So those are really cool and fun and a gamification of the red and blue teaming. But what we see from our customers is one of their core challenges is keeping people in their seats, keeping them happy in their jobs. Because as we all know, like the cyber talent shortage is a major problem. So we want to make sure that for our customers, that their employees are happy, that they're adding new skill sets into their repertoire, that they are excited and playing with cool new tech. So Capture the Flag really does that. But the part that's more on the business side and transformational is the ATC is actually used to test out new technologies and also do the integrations beforehand. So say you're working on a big project and you're like, all right, I'm trying to decide what technology to put in there. These are some of the tools that are in my environment. I need to make sure that for this use case, they integrate together.
And that's the huge challenge, because sometimes the tools are basically just a box of Legos, and they give you a picture in the front with no instructions, and you're like, good luck, right?
Exactly. And the thing is, we want to enable our customers to take advantage of new technology, but a lot of times their staff they were hired on because they knew a certain tool set, or they had skills that were maybe routing centric, and maybe in this new world they need to have a different type of skill set. So when you give them a safe environment to test out their use cases, to get their hands on the technology, by the time they're ready to operationalize it, they're hitting the ground running, they're doing it that much faster, they're more successful, and really just helps everybody get there to a successful outcome faster.
And that's sometimes a challenge, because you just don't have the time to do that, right? A lot of times they're just trying to keep the enterprise from burning down. And then testing things and experimenting seems like to be a luxury.
Oh, 100%. And then you even throw in some of the challenges that we dealt with 3 years ago, where it was supply chain shortages.
Right.
And it's like, well, how do I even spin up all of these resources in my own labs to be able to test out this new technology? Or here's the other thing too, is for a lot of security tools, you have to go through security risk assessments just to make sure that whatever you're putting in even if it's your lab environment, is up to snuff. And when you're able to do that in a safe place that's leveraged by a third party, you basically get rid of all of that red tape. So they're able to start looking at the technology immediately, looking at the criteria that's important to them. And here, the other cool thing is, like, when I talk about WWT, so we're a $21 billion company, which means that we get to do some of the coolest projects with some of the biggest companies. And we have so many different learnings from that. And so every time we do a new engagement with a customer, we're not just taking knowledge from that specific scenario with that specific customer. We have this huge wealth of knowledge from all of these other projects that we've done.
So I wanted to take a moment to talk about the ever-evolving threat landscape and kind of what we're facing today. And I'd like to get some of your feedback on that too. What we're dealing with today is we have dedicated groups whose 9-to-5 job is basically to probe our defenses and try to penetrate the network. And they're allowed to operate openly in the countries that they're in, and they're often encouraged. It's no longer the hacker in the basement who is trying to get to your company. These are organized, often state-sponsored groups. So we're in a position of low-grade conflict. And security through obscurity is no longer a thing. And that's now a level of unknown, unmeasured risk if you're trying to do security through obscurity. And I know sometimes people don't want to look at it, but sometimes it's not your fault. Let's look at the really unfortunate incidents that happened with Midnight Eclipse and Arcane Door, which is the Cisco and Palo event. Odds are nobody here was targeted, but suddenly you're in the blast radius. Basically, every version of Firepower Threat Defense and ASA needed to be changed, and doing a change control firewall reboot in the middle of the day is very difficult or challenging, especially if you have change control. But as an active ongoing Sev 10, that's a level of risk that may warrant the cost of that outage. What is your take on the threat landscape today?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously evolving incredibly fast right now. When I think about what's changed in the last 12 months, I think we'd be remiss not to talk about how the adversaries are leveraging AI to be faster, to be better at what they do. And I think that in order for us to be able to combat that, I do think that a high level of hygiene, visibility, and connectivity in your architecture is really critical. Because we go back to the issues we talked about before, which is there's a talent shortage, right. There's these skills gaps. You need to be able to knit together a security ecosystem that's going to be easy to use and that's going to provide you a deeper level of visibility and observability so you at least can understand what's going on in your environment to protect it.
One of the challenges that I feel I personally have with AI is understanding its upper and lower limits, because it has some kind of limitations. And because I have a background in networking, I know that there is a packet per second, or there are certain limitations to networking. That means that I know in the cloud it can never exceed a certain level, because I know it lives on real hardware, even though it's been abstracted away from me. And with AI, I don't have a feel for that. I know there's limitations, but right now it's just like magic, right? And since it's magic and we don't understand, maybe, or at least I don't understand, some of the foundational parts of it, we don't necessarily know what to protect against, right? We don't understand the adversary or the tool,
right,
as a whole. And I think if I'm a bad guy, because I think like a bad guy, I would be trying to leverage that right away. And that's why I was in QA for years. My first thought is, how can I break this, right? And I broke a lot of things. But
yeah, it's a great point you make with AI. I think one of the things that's challenging is there's a very low barrier to entry.
Yes,
it's so
yes.
user friendly. So you don't necessarily have to have an advanced skill set to launch an attack now. I mean, these are things that are packaged up and they're essentially crowdsourced from a collaborative community, which is not that we're not a collaborative community in cyber, but I mean, it also is a competitive landscape. So you don't even have the same collaboration that the adversaries have because they're essentially just going after it together to make as much money as possible. So it is interesting to see that kind of juxtaposition of the adversaries versus the protectors. I can't say that I'm an expert in AI. I don't think anyone really is. I think that's kind of the ship is being built as we're moving. One of the neat things, though, that I'm super proud to be a part of at WWT is we actually just did a $500 million investment in an AI proving ground. And so we have extremely deep partnerships with Intel and NVIDIA. And so as AI is evolving in front of us, we're kind of having that front row seat because we're testing all of those technologies alongside them. And we're actually getting a chance to look at some really cool AI startups,
Right.
which is like a fun thing. I would say like that's the cool factor.
Well, and
right
one
now.
thing I'd like to say to ground us a little bit, there's nothing new in tech, and there's been nothing new in tech in decades. The concepts are all the same. It's just been repackaged, repurposed. Let's take a look at like the next-gen firewall. The cloud routes, the cloud does VPNs, the cloud NATs. So it kind of took the things that were all sandwiched into a very particular device and then just removed them one by one and made them services, right?
That's absolutely
So
right, yeah.
there's nothing really new. It's just been repurposed. Going back to some of the threat actors and problems that we're facing today, Gigamon has done some research, and this is also backed up by Mandiant if you look at their report, but as many as 1 in 3 breaches go undetected. And sometimes an organization finds out they've been breached because the ransomware actor asks for money or a system is down, right? And we were discussing this earlier. And when we talk about something like full stack observability, it looks top down, it looks at the workloads, it looks at all the processes that are running, and then it adds network logging. Well, I'm of the opinion that network logging is not enough. It's not application aware. That's a problem. We're using network logs to solve a problem they were never meant to solve for. And that means we're kind of blind to lateral traffic inside the organization. We've built these fortifications on the perimeter. We have these next-gen firewalls. But again, if we look at our report and the Mandiant report, right, there's a lot of lateral movement inside the network. And one of the things they're doing is just non-standard port usage. That goes completely undetected. And that's risk, right? That's risk that an organization has an undefined level of risk within their network. And when you add like some of the application visibility, you'll see known and unknown applications. Some compliance frameworks like PCI and Zero Trust specifically call out that you have to know what's on your network. And that's not possible with a top-down view. Now, I'm not saying don't have the top-down view. By all means, please use your EDRs. We need those, and NDRs. But we can have a broad lateral visibility from the bottom up with Gigamon. That could greatly aid some of the future AI. I'm kind of curious to see what I could do if I could start teaching AI to redirect certain kinds of traffic when it uses to certain tools, right? So I just thought about that earlier today because I was pondering, what can I use it for?
Yeah, and I think that's the right approach with AI. It's like right now it is a new frontier, but it's a tool.
It's
how
just a
do
tool.
how do we make ourselves more efficient? How do we avoid human error? And I think that's really one of the fundamentals. And kind of earlier when you're talking about there's nothing new, it is kind of funny. Like when we look at AI, so much of what we're just trying to wrap our arms around is data governance. So if we're leveraging AI, what do we put in it, and how do we make sure that it doesn't go places we don't want it to go? And so a lot of times it's really just hygiene, and that brings us back to really what you guys do, not necessarily from a data governance perspective, but from a visibility perspective. It's making sure that you have the observability, the hygiene, and awareness of what's happening in your environment to properly respond to it.
Well, and you may not have full control over your environment, right? There's always shadow IT. There's always threat actors. Conceptually, there's not a big difference between shadow IT and threat actors, right? They're changing your vulnerability surface. You may not know what applications are out there. And what we've started to do on the visibility front, because we see so much, it's a little overwhelming. So we started to frame the visibility through compliance frameworks. We've done some zero trust mapping, the Department of Defense. 152 controls we've mapped. We've recently done PCI. It's all the same, but we're just filtering that visibility through those compliance lenses, and that helps describe risk and cost to leadership because that's ultimately what they're concerned about. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to like bridge the gap between the tactical practitioner and the strategic C-level planner because they don't necessarily speak the same language, right? Because the problem the C-level has is they're being pressured from the board to deploy zero trust, to deploy compliance frameworks without any additional resources or skill set. So they're trying to leverage what they have. So the very first thing they're going to do is risk and cost. Well, if you're a practitioner and you see a problem, don't tell them that you've got this particular weird technical problem. Tell them that you have a level of unknown or unquantified risk that you've discovered. And that'll better get their attention. And then if you can somehow pivot that into cost, for example, it now takes 90% less time to troubleshoot a problem. That's cost, right? We're spending less engineering cycles on or less downtime on it.
I love that you guys think that way. It's One of the things that we sometimes get caught up in the tech industry is we use different language. So all of these different vendors are talking about product and using those names, and it doesn't always translate to our customers because they're trying to get their day-to-day job done. They're trying to understand, all right, I have this initiative. What kind of tooling am I going to add to my environment? And then they have to decode what the heck we're talking about.
So I'm guilty of that as well as a recovering engineer. If you bring an engineer a firewall, they intrinsically understand the 5, 10, 20 use cases it has. If you bring that firewall to a cloud person, they have no idea what you're doing or what it means. So when you're trying to solve a problem for, say, in the cloud, tell the cloud operation person the problem you're trying to solve. And they may get there a totally different way because your tools don't necessarily directly translate to the cloud. And again, that's risk and cost because you're going to spend a whole lot of money trying to put some of those virtualized monolithic tools in the cloud because they're going to chew up CPU and bandwidth, all of which you pay for by the clock cycle, right? And again, the C-level, when I bring him this fancy new next-gen firewall, I know what all the fun things it can do, right? But they don't. And to them, it's just a cost. A cost. Do they need the cost? Well, if you tell them it helps offset this level of risk, then maybe that's a cost worth just paying.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And one of the things that we're actually seeing is there's a new CRO in town. And it's a chief risk officer versus the chief revenue officer that we usually think of when we hear CRO. And there's such an intense focus right now on mitigating that risk. Just because when we look at the numbers, right, like the costs are so high when you don't have the right standard of cybersecurity. And that's one of the cool things is that we see for our customers is that they're empowered through their budgets because their budgets are not often cut because they know that the cost of not having a proper architecture it far outweighs whatever they're going to spend on tooling.
Kind of where we're at now in the industry as a whole, we're very good at recover, remediate for a breach. Very good. We're not good at detect, protect, because there's no positive feedback loop when you get it right. You don't know. You just get to go home Friday, right? And what we're trying to solve for is with this network visibility is eliminate some of the blind spots because that's unknown, unquantified risk that you potentially have on the network. That IoT device, you may not think nothing of it, but it only speaks RC4 and the certificate on it expired 4 years ago, right? That potentially could be compromised because of the deprecated cipher. And then what we're seeing right now is, I suppose, they're state-level threat actors. They're doing router software firmware replacements. So if you have a 10-year-old Netgear that's been online and never been touched, it's probably had its software replaced by some threat actor, and that allows them remote access. And we're seeing these nation states develop a form of onion routing using these home routers. And it's the outside interface of the firewall, if you will, just like the Palo or the ASA. How can you see that? There's no reasonable way a security practitioner inside the network can see that. So on the ASA, what the threat actors is they added a self-signed certificate that only was shown to the outside to unknown connections. They detected it via Shodan. Now, I don't know who those threat actors are. That's cool, right? Kudos to you for coming up with that. That's really awesome. Look, you got to give respect to really good tradecraft, right? One possible solution to that is I want to address this concept of a single source of truth. Your firewalls, your routers, your switches, they're all a single source of truth. Well, moving forward, that's going to be a problem. Gigamon laterally sits on the network broadly, also can create network logs, but we don't participate in the traffic. We just watch it come and go. So we create network logs in parallel. Now we could potentially tap in front of and behind the firewall, and this alleviates risk because if you start seeing deltas with your second source of truth, something's up, right? Yeah. You need your EDR, you need your NDR, you need all your logging, but we're going to have to start to think about how to level that up. And I'm not saying that we never would have stopped any kind of attack. We're not a security company. We're a visibility solution. But when those attacks happened, you were in the blast radius. And once you knew your Palo was doing a wget every 60 seconds, if we were outside with application visibility, you could do a quick search for that, right? If you're running reports for self-signed certificates, and you run that report every day, or you have a dashboard up, and we can show you some of those, and suddenly one pops up and it's your ASA, well, that's a 10-alarm fire, right? And it's better that you find out than the ransomware actor calls you asking for money, right? And that's definitely something that has been happening.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it is really interesting to see what you guys have done in this space. It is very differentiated from any of the competition. I mean, when we talk about the awareness at the application level, that's just something it's not happening elsewhere.
And I think it's absolutely critical as a former network engineer and security practitioner. I worked at Tipping Point for 11 years, where I had access to over 100,000 true positive network attacks in PCAPs. And they bought me a whole stack of equipment. I had Firepower, I had Palos, I had other IPSs. And the reason we had that is we wanted to be able to be a trusted advisor to our customer and know that various things, how they worked, so we could then mitigate engineering solutions around them. And I was generally disappointed if you change something from the log. It's really hard to tell. So I used to traverse the network for fun, because that's the kind of weirdo I am. And then I would go check the logs to see if I could reverse engineer what I did. Most of the time I couldn't. So that's why we're pivoting heavily into EDR, and that's a very good way to go. But what about IoT? We're kind of forgetting about IoT. So if you're a point of sale device, if you're a medical device, this is why all the hospitals are getting in trouble, is they have all these IoT devices, and the only way to mitigate them is through segmentation, micro-segmentation. Well, that's hard to do without network visibility.
Yeah.
So this is, again, a level of unquantified, unknown risk. And just, you can't do anything until you know what's out there, right?
No, it's so true. And one of the things that I think would be really cool to share is, because when we look at architectures, we try to look at it very holistically, and we think about integrations. Can you talk to me about, sorry, I just stole your podcast. Can you talk to me about some of your alliance partners that are really helping you guys drive some of those outcomes? So leveraging the visibility that you give them to help stop some of these threats.
Alliances are absolutely critical for us, because I want to discuss a little bit about what we don't do, right? We don't store the data. We don't take action on the data. We don't alert the data. And that's good, because you get to keep all of your existing tools, right? What we can do is we can feed those tools this application level visibility that currently you probably don't have. Now, you may have it through a next-gen firewall, which lives at a perimeter. NDRs can do this as well, but NDRs see where they sit. And we have a much broader lateral footprint, and now we can leverage the core competency of a packet broker. We can start feeding the NDR corners of the network it can't reach itself, right? So either you could buy a bunch of NDRs, put them everywhere, or get a big stack and bring all the traffic to them. And in a private network or on private cloud, that's much easier to do. Again, it's also a second source of the truth concept, right? Have the NDR log. It doesn't cost anything extra for us to do it once you have the module, and we can log in parallel. But we also have this ability to know when we see the same conversation more than once when we're feeding your NDR. That's going to save you on ingest cost, on compute, on bandwidth. We'll only send it to them once. So that's a cost savings, right?
Yeah.
So we can make your existing tools live longer by only sending them the traffic they need. We can be a second source or an additional source of truth for your logging. And we have huge ROI savings and calculators on the website. And we also have some cloud calculators.
Oh, that's awesome. We're really excited for the partnership and what we're doing and the value we're all bringing to our customers. So thank you so much for having me over here and talking to your group.
Thank you, Traci.
Awesome. Thank you.